on 5 Live.
Good afternoon, welcome to live coverage of free practice one for the Austrian Grand Prix. F1's 9th race of the season sees us in the idyllic natural bowl of the Styrian Mountains at the Red Bull Ring in Spielberg, about an hour or so from Graz. Rain is threatening across the weekend according to the forecasts, but right now it is dry with a few white puffy clouds in the air, but otherwise rather lovely weather ahead of this one and only practice session because it is a sprint weekend, and that changes up the format. We'll dive into how that all plays out shortly. First of all, though, this is how the championship looks. It is, unsurprisingly, Max Verstappen who is at the top. He has a 69-point advantage over his teammate Sergio Perez. Then it's Alonso, Hamilton and Carlos Sainz who round out the top 5. In the Constructors' Championship, it is Red Bull who have won every single race so far this season with a whopping 154-point gap at the top. Second place, Mercedes. Third, Aston Martin, which is developing into quite a nice battle there. Particularly, I should say, in the midfield as well. It is tight in the Constructors' standings. As we get into the first running of the weekend, guiding you through all the coverage is myself, Harry Benjamin, and this weekend I'm very pleased to be joined by the former Williams F1 driver and reserve driver, Jack Aiken. Welcome back, Jack.
Thanks for having me back, as always. It's a pleasure.
Now, what have you were back last year in Australia, so what have you made of the season since then? Obviously, it's Max Verstappen who's doing rather well.
Yeah, it's definitely been a bit hard to watch for anyone who's not a Verstappen fan. Even poor old Checo's starting to fall by the wayside, isn't he? But it's not over yet. We've still got a long way in the season to go, so we've got hope. We've got hope something might happen.
There is hope, perhaps, but at the Red Bull Ring, well, who might well have the home advantage? Red Bull probably don't really need it, do they? But it is a sprint weekend too, so that does change the format up slightly. We've already had one sprint event this year back in Baku, and it's changed for this year. So if you're not up to speed, basically Saturday's sprint race will no longer set the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix like it did last year. Grand Prix qualifying is today. It is later on today, and whoever is fastest starts Sunday's race from pole position. Simple as that. A new separate shorter qualifying session, the sprint shootout, will now take place on Saturday morning, so that removes FP2. The sprint, along with its own qualifying then, the shootout, essentially a whole new entity, completely separate from the main Grand Prix. The BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson is also with us. Andrew, do we like this new format? Do we think it actually adds anything now there's no real jeopardy towards the Grand Prix?
Well, that would be expressing an opinion, Harry, wouldn't it? Which I'm not really allowed to do. It doesn't really matter whether I like it or not. It's whether the audience like it. But I think one thing that's interesting about the sprint, and I did suggest this to Christian Horner last year, and he got a bit shirty with me, but Red Bull have got a bit of a history of messing sprints up. So if you think there were 3 sprints last year, 2 of them they didn't win. One of them was here in Austria, and Charles Leclerc won for Ferrari, and one was in Brazil where George Russell won for Mercedes. Now, each time Red Bull left the race thinking that they'd kind of not really got their setup right, and that is a risk with the sprint. It adds in jeopardy because you've only got this one practice session, which we're about to watch now, to lock in your setup, decide on what you're going to do, and then the car is fixed for the rest of the weekend. So if you make a mistake and the car isn't right, then you're not going to be an optimum performance. I'm not going to say that's introducing any real jeopardy when it comes to Red Bull because they're so strong this year, particularly Verstappen. But let's just see. When I did point that out to Horner, he said, well, don't forget we did dominate Imola, I think was the other sprint. And he's absolutely right about that, of course, but that's 1 out of 3. So I think I win that argument.
Yeah, you do make a fair point there. Well, hashtag BBC F1. Let us know your thoughts on the new revised sprint weekend and the sprint format. But we just heard the sounds of Lewis Hamilton peeling out of his Mercedes garage to wait at the end of the pit lane, and tyres being bolted on to some of the cars up and down the garage as we wait and see what is in store for Jack, the one and only practice session that we now get. Of course, this is a big implication that the sprint does get. We don't get FP1, 2 or 3. We get 1 hour of running. And at a time where a lot of teams are bringing some quite crucial upgrades as well, the likes of McLaren, Williams bringing an upgrade to the second car this weekend, Red Bull bringing a few new bits as well, that surely puts a lot of pressure on this one and only session as we get the green light and we are away for FP1.
Certainly does. I think one of the interesting points around these sprint weekends, which Benny was referring to, is the fact that you have to lock in the setup for your car so early in the weekend, and where that can be an issue is if you don't have a representative FP1. Luckily for the teams, perhaps unluckily for us, it does look like pretty typical weather for Red Bull Ring. We've got pretty sunny, warm temperatures, track temperatures right up there at 45 degrees at the moment, and it does tend to get quite hot here, which is a challenge for the tyres. But it's going to be good data for the teams who are trialling all those new parts, trying to build up their race setups and just generally get a good first stab at it. So I think they've got as much as they could ask for, really.
Well, for those of you who wish to do a little sync up, it's 59 minutes and 5, 4, 3 seconds of free practice 1 remaining on this unique track really on the calendar. Shortest circuit, has the fewest corners, officially has 10 turns, but really you knock a couple off because in Formula 1 speeds they're not really considered turns. It's an incredibly undulating track. Here's Max Verstappen coming through the final corner.
Radio check, Max.
Yeah, radio check.
Okay, you are loud.
But not clear.
That's a bit clearer now, yeah.
Max Verstappen talking to his engineer Gianpiero Lambiase. Actually, he's been in the news this week. Talk of how he got the job. Had to be interviewed by Sebastian Vettel apparently before GP joined Red Bull. So they really put him through the ringer on that one.
Yeah, he used to work for Force India. I did a track walk with him and Paul Di Resta at Austin back in 2012, actually. He's a really nice guy. So I don't know whether you could hear, Harry, or whether the audience could hear, but there was already some cheering in the background there. The grandstands are full of orange-clad fans who've all come down from Holland, obviously, the Netherlands, to cheer on Max Verstappen. We're now into the sort of the European heartland of the season, and a lot of the races will have this character. Hungary, lots of Dutch fans go there too, and then after that there's Belgium, where obviously they go there, and then Holland after the summer break itself. So we can expect to hear a lot of cheering, but it just goes to show how devoted they are to Max Verstappen. They're already there at the beginning of first practice, cheering away.
Yeah, the orange flares aren't quite out in full force just yet, but we can expect to see the track covered in a bit of orange as we get more and more into the weekend. Max Verstappen comes across the line to set his first proper lap time and is straight up to the top with a 1:08.0 for Verstappen. Russell, Stroll and Bottas also just getting up into second place, so first proper lap times heading out at the moment. People on a mixture of hard and the medium compound tyres available this weekend, exactly the same as Canada last time out, the C3 hard, the C4 medium and the C5 soft. This is the sound of Charles Leclerc coming around into the final sector of this track, which a lot of people say is a bit like a bobsleigh run, Jack. It's sort of quite quick corners coming at you quite intensely.
Yeah, and it's a majority of it is downhill as well. It's very difficult to get perspective if you've ever seen the track on TV of those elevation changes, but you come through turn 9 now, diving downhill already where the car gets quite unsettled on the entry. Down through turn 9, another right-hander with a big compression at the apex where you often see the cars bottoming out, such as the aggressiveness of that compression, and the teams really have to be careful on their setup with ride heights here for that.
Another thing you've got to be quite mindful of, I think, around here is the curbs, as we're just getting a replay of Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes riding one of the curves and the sparks being kicked up from underneath, bit of dust offline as well, but they can catch you out around here.
Yeah, the curbs are always a big talking point of Red Bull Ring, and actually there's been a few changes since we were here last, I believe. They've removed some of the sausage curbs because of basically trying to avoid situations where they can catch the floor of the car and ping people up into the air, which is never something you want to see. So exit of turn 6, very fast left-hander. We used to have a series of little buttons, mini sausages, if you will, mini sleeping policemen. Whichever term you prefer, we have them all. They've been removed, so you can use just a little bit more track before you dip wheels into the gravel there, but it's very hard to get all 4 wheels out there. And then the penultimate corner, turn 9, there was also a bollard, I believe, in previous years, which they've removed because that seemed rather pointless. And I think, you know, we're still yet to see how they're really going to police the track limits here, but it should be, I imagine, to the white line to keep things consistent, you'd hope.
Yeah, the drivers have basically laid down the law when it comes to sausage curves, banana curves, whatever you want to call them. They basically...
Banana?
They've been called that in the past?
Have they?
Yeah.
I've not heard that.
They are yellow and longer.
That is true, yeah.
Exactly, because they just thought they were an unnecessary danger. People, you know, people have been breaking their backs being launched over sausage curbs in the past, and the drivers basically said they're completely unnecessary, they're very dangerous, just please get rid of them. So the FIA has listened to that, and I'm sure, Jack, you've been in some driver briefings when those conversations have been happening.
Driver briefing involving track limits and I can't imagine such a thing. But no, yeah, they're very, it's a very difficult subject, and the drivers have been very vocal about it, as you say, but at the same time, it's, well, what do you put in place? You know, this has been a topic all year of track limits and people complaining that the white line is very hard for the driver to feel, whereas if you allow them to, say, use the red and white curb as the limit of the track, that's something tactile that the driver gets through the seat of the car, the feedback of the vibrations. But, you know, and the FIA will argue, well, that's not the track, it's black and white in the regulations. We run safety standards, simulations based on the speed you can carry between the white lines, not the red and white curves. And it's a whole thing. So what do you replace the sausages with? And that's something they're still trying to figure out.
Well, as they figure that out, Esteban Ocon in the Alpine, who you just heard in the background there, kind of across the line in his Alpine in third spot. But Lewis Hamilton with his DRS flap wide open, the rear wing that opens in the designated zones, and you can use it at any time during a practice session. But in the designated zones, but in the race, you've got to be within a second of the car in front. He then goes up into third. This is the sound of Esteban Ocon. As we were talking about track limits, he was getting rather close to the white line coming through the final corner. And over. Well, certainly the front right wheel over. And Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin very much over both the white lines. I think that was coming out of turn 4 on the approach to the final sector of this lap.
Those kind of corners for people who aren't able to view at the moment. Exit of turn 4, you have a strip of red and white curbing, which is quite flat, and then painted blue concrete. And it's just wide enough that you can get a track limit violation there before you start dipping wheels into the gravel. But it's so fine, and it's those kind of corners that I wonder how strict they're going to be this weekend when, you know, the natural edge of the gravel really dictates it anyway. In the past, certainly, the stewards would turn a blind eye to those corners.
The sound of George Russell in his Mercedes comes across the line and heads up into 6th fastest. So it's Sergio Perez currently fastest with a 1:07.1 in front of Verstappen, Hamilton, Ocon, Alonso the top 5, Russell, Stroll, Zhou Guanyu, Gasly, Bottas the top 10, Leclerc, Piastri, Sainz, Norris, Hulkenberg the top 15, Magnussen, De Vries, Tsunoda, Alex Albon 19th, and Logan Sargent in the Williams yet to be out on track. This is the sound of Carlos Sainz making his way into turn 1, but not quite getting it done. Has to bail out onto the multicoloured runoff, and there's a little escape road that you can take there, so no harm done there for Sainz, but that'll be a lap that he has to restart.
So on track limits, guys, I can tell you what the race director's event notes say. They say, as the rules say, the white lines define the track edges. During qualifying, sprint shootout, sprint and race, each time a driver fails to negotiate with the track limits, I think that's a badly written way of saying goes over the white line, this will result in that lap time being invalidated. Additionally, each time a driver again fails to negotiate with the exit of turn 10, I think he means goes over the white line at the end of the exit of turn 10, will result in that lap time and the immediately following lap time being invalidated.
Yeah, and that's because they don't want drivers opening out the exit of the last corner, jamming on the throttle really early to get an advantage as they cross the line and carry that speed into the next lap. But yeah, interesting, they're using broad strokes there, and that kind of language is the kind of thing that they'll say it in the driver's briefing, then everyone kind of looks around at each other and says, okay, well, what do you actually mean that? Because there's a lot of corners here where, like I say, exit of turn 4, exit of turn 6 and 7, where you could just go over the white line and brush the gravel, but it's not technically legal. Anyway, we saw another few replays while we were nattering about track limits. Guanyu Zhou going wide as well. No, sorry, Bottas at turn 1. and Tsunoda locking up into the very, very uphill braking zone of turn 3. So track grip's still not quite there, and still at least, what was it, 2 seconds off times that we'd expect to see normally once the track is rubbered in.
Yeah, but 50 minutes and 6 seconds remaining of free practice 1. Now, Jack, you're a former Williams man. You had a close relationship with them. Off the back of a great result in Canada for Alex Albon, really defended that drive and a hard-earned 7th place finish in Montreal with a car that had significant upgrades. We come to Austria, and Logan Sargent will now also get those upgrades too. How impressed are you by Albon, and do we think that Williams are really on the up here and they can play a crucial factor in this midfield fight?
Certainly, I hope so. I mean, we all know Alex's talent. He's been doing a fantastic job consistently in that car, and those upgrades seem to indicate a step forwards. They're always trying to get to, you know, further in the mix of that midfield, but it's an ever-changing landscape. It seems like more than ever, it's a bit track dependent who's on top there, and they haven't actually, well, I say they haven't been out. Alex has been out for a little install lap or two, but there's no time set for the two Williams at the moment, so not sure if there's an issue or they're just taking their time for others to rubber in the track for them.
Yeah, Sargent hasn't even gone out and done any kind of track running yet, so we'll wait and see what's going on down at Williams. Nick De Vries crosses the line in his AlphaTauri to go 10th fastest, a man who continues to be under pressure. But Andrew, a lot of talk actually around the AlphaTauri team at the moment, and where it's going to go in terms of its management under Red Bull. They very much sounds like they want to keep it, well, they are going to keep it within the Red Bull family, perhaps a new name change, but also in the public, Helmut Marko and openly saying Christian Horner didn't really agree with him, that they wanted Nick De Vries in the car for this year, which, to say that publicly, for a driver who's already under pressure, that's hard to hear.
Well, look, Red Bull don't mess about with their drivers. They're not a team for mollycoddling or putting arms around shoulders. It's very much a rocket up the bum from Red Bull if you're not performing. And this is not the first time Helmut Marko's made a remark about Nick De Vries. It's probably the cruelest, basically revealing that when they were deciding to sign him in sort of late summer of last year, Christian Horner wasn't convinced by him. And I've heard the argument as to why you wouldn't go with Nick De Vries. He was basically the slower of the two Mercedes Formula E drivers over the previous 2 seasons, even though he won the championship in the first of those years, and then Stoffel Vandoorne, his teammate, won it the second year. Vandoorne was a bit unlucky in that first season. I think most people would agree that he was the more impressed with the two drivers. And Stoffel Vandoorne, after all, is a guy who has been in Formula One and got spat out the other side after 2 very difficult years alongside Fernando Alonso at McLaren. I mean, it's a difficult job for anybody to be alongside Fernando Alonso, as Lance Stroll's discovering this year, but even so. So you can see why Horner wouldn't be convinced, but that De Vries was the right guy just because he did one good drive at Monza in a race that actually Alex Albon, Jack, I'm sure you know about this, Alex Albon was absolutely gutted to get appendicitis that weekend because he thought he was on for a really, really strong result. And then Nick De Vries finished, I think, 8th, was it? And got all the glory, but I think Albon felt he would have done considerably better than that because it was a strong race for Williams last year. So the argument was that, you know, you based that decision to sign De Vries on sort of wrong evidence, if you like. I'm not trying to be cruel to Nick De Vries. He's a very, very accomplished racing driver with a lot of experience. But I guess Horner's saying, is he proper world-class Formula One level? And I think so far he has had a difficult start to his career in Formula One.
Well,
Any thoughts, Jack?
Well, yeah, Jack, I was going to say, Jack, as a driver, I'm sure you've had your fair share of, you know, headlines where you've been put under pressure or things haven't worked out for you, coming up through Formula 2.
I was never that famous. Don't do me that.
No, come on. But, you know, from a driver's perspective, De Vries is surely going to be seeing this and hearing this. How do you block that out?
I think, going back to what Andrew said straight off the bat, you know what you're signing up for when you enter the Red Bull fold. I think it would be naive to not think that there are those conversations happening in the background. Seeing them in public, that's just the way that Dr. Marko operates. And if I was Nick, you'd just kind of shrug and say, well, I mean, whether it's public or not, does it really affect me? I mean, not really, I'd say. you know, not everyone has that same view, but Nick's, you know, pretty experienced by a rookie's standard. In air quotes, I say rookie because he's done a lot of testing. He's a World Championship winner in Formula E, although I do agree with Andrew that there was a little bit of fortune involved in all of that as well. And of course, he's an F2 champion. So one thing that I think a lot of people might not know is Nick is a guy that generally, looking at his junior single-seater career, he builds into things. You know, his first year was never really a strong point, whether it was in World Series by Renault, whether it was GP3, Formula 2, Formula E. It's a very consistent trend that he's maybe underperformed in his first year with a new car, a new team. And then in the second or third year, he's generally come good and he ends up being strong.
That was nice on the bug. Blocked me.
That was Zhou Guanyu there, just coming through turn 7 and into 8 with the Mercedes. Out of line, so I wouldn't call that a particularly harsh block, would you, Jack?
No, it's also practice, so
but that's the other thing.
To get on with it.
We also saw a few drivers having skirmishes. Esteban Ocon, the Alpine, quite a big one in the final corner and clattering the grass. Leclerc also going wide, coming through turn 9 and into 10, the final corner. So tricky conditions and getting to grips with a track that has not had much running. We've had a bit of F3 and F2 practice out there today, but other than that, it's a fairly green track with 43 minutes and 54 seconds to go. Verstappen, Alonso and Hamilton are the top 3.
So I think the concern for De Vries, who is currently 12th and
14.
slightly...
Oh, sorry, no, you're right, yeah.
Slightly quicker than his teammate Yuki Tsunoda. Is how patient Red Bull are going to be, and does he have the time to build into his Formula 1 career? They don't tend to like drivers who do that. They want drivers who can basically nail it from their first lap, you know, of their first race. And De Vries hasn't done that so far, and he's made a lot of errors as well. And the problem is that there's not an obvious person that they might put in. But there's a Japanese guy called Ayumu Iwasa who's doing very well in Formula 2 at the moment. He's third in the championship. He's a Red Bull protege, and of course, Red Bull use Honda engines. And Tsunoda owes his place in Formula 1 to Honda, and Iwasa's the next guy on the conveyor belt. So I would say De Vries is under a bit of pressure.
But that's going to change very soon, isn't it? Relatively, in the world of F1, I say soon.
True, yeah.
I mean, they've got this deal coming with Ford in 2025, is it? Sorry,
6. With new engine race.
Okay, so a little bit further down the road. But there were some comments in the press from Verstappen earlier this year when Honda announced their deal with Aston, and he sounded a bit miffed, as if to say, well, hang on, you've said that you don't want to do your engine branding and so on with us, kind of got these engines grudgingly. Here's Verstappen.
Something is hanging loose on the right rear end plate. I don't know exactly what it is.
In the boxes so that they can have a look at that. Sounding a bit miffed to say, yeah, Honda have said they don't really want to continue with us, and now all of a sudden we find out that you've signed with another team. Obviously the engines have been extremely successful, so it's no small thing. So I do wonder if that Honda relationship will continue, and there have been some question marks over Tsunoda's seat as a result of that as well. But you are right that they have more of a pick from their junior crop than they have had in previous years. It's been a bit dry in the last 5 years, I'd say, whereas now, like I said, they have Iwasa, they have Lawson, arguably they have Ricciardo as well. So,
well, who sounds like he may well be looking for a way back, and is willing to sort of pay his dues and work his way back up if he needs to and wants to finish his career with Red Bull. But there has been obviously a lot of pressure at De Vries. I feel like we talk about him every weekend because there's always something around him, and Tsunoda has definitely had the upper hand. But surely they've got to give him at least the full season for De Vries, because Franz Tost, I know he's off at the end of the year, the team principal, but his school of thought is, you've got to give these rookies, and De Vries is a rookie. I know he has this vibe around him, and he's more than that, but he is. Look at Van Dorn. He had a race outing once and with McLaren before he got the full-time seat, and there wasn't as much furore of him being, F2 champ and already having a race in F1 under his belt. So Tost normally likes to give drivers 3 years. I know he's off, but surely they've got to give him a bit more time.
They don't have to do anything, Harry. Do what the hell they want.
Well, okay, yeah, fine. But he hasn't. I don't think he's been that bad to be dropped mid-season or something like that.
I think it's unlikely, but it's never impossible with Red Bull. You just don't know. They've been a little bit more lenient in recent years than in their past, where they were really brutal, to be frank, with their junior drivers. Maybe they realise that they don't quite want to approach it as aggressively as that, but no, I don't think that he necessarily deserves to be given more than one season, more than Logan Sargent. He's had quite a promising junior career. We're on board with him now. He's finally come out from his for his first proper run with some Flovers, and he's having an extremely tough time as well. I don't expect that he would get more than a season either. The people are already talking about changing him out mid-season.
But that conversation has only just started, whereas with De Vries, it feels like it was from right at the start of the year.
Yeah, that's probably true. That's fair enough. I think there was more expectation around De Vries, as you say. He'd done so well on paper in other series that there was this pressure to do well straight away. And, it's just not that simple in F1. Getting some on board of Hamilton, that car in particular has been bottoming out a lot. I've been watching as we've been discussing this stuff, and he's really taking all of the track that he can, and even some sparks and little bits of carbon flying off there as he bottoms out over the exit curbs of turn 9. Very, very fast corner.
We've also had a shot just recently of the new bodywork on the McLaren. This is a big weekend for them. Andrea Stella, the team principal, described this upgrade that they've introduced on just Lando Norris's car this weekend, because they've rushed it to get it to the track as soon as possible, as a milestone for them. Just a bit of background on that. They admitted even before the car ran that they'd missed their development targets, and James Key, the technical director, subsequently paid the price for that. And this is really the car that they feel they should have started the season with had they spotted this development route earlier. And just looking at that bodywork, it's very Red Bull-esque. It was a very deep undercut on the side pod, and it's all about the change to the floor shape fundamentally, this upgrade, although there's lots of other changes on, as I say, on the side pod, the engine cover, the side pod inlet, and the rear bodywork. But it's the floor that defines everything pretty much in terms of performance on these cars, and it's a whole new floor, McLaren say, on that car.
Well, Albon just went fifth fastest, so he's on the soft compound of tyre, 106.794. Hamilton, though, with the fastest time, 106.4, ahead of Verstappen, Alonso, Perez. They are all in the pits. Then it was Albon, Stroll, Tsunoda, Ocon, Bottas, Norris, the top 10. Gasly, Zhou Guanyu, Magnussen, De Vries, Russell, the top 15. Leclerc, Sainz, the two Ferraris, down in 16th and 17th at the moment. They are on the hard compound of tyre. Piastri behind them. Then it's Hülkenberg and Logan Sargent, who, after a late start, is out on track and finding time, his own personal best in sector 1 and 2, and the whole left side, as you look at the car for the Williams, is absolutely covered in green Floviz paint as he makes his way around the final corner. Of course, Sargent didn't get the upgrades that the team brought in Montreal. He does get them now, and he crosses the line, and it's a 107.8, only fast enough for 18th at the moment. But of course, we speak of under pressure drivers. We mentioned Sargent. He's now getting to tracks that he has more experience and knowledge of. Right at the start of the season, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Australia, Baku, he's a limited experience for a junior single-seater driver that's made his way up the ranks, with the exception of Bahrain. So now, surely, this run of European that we're going to get is going to play into the likes of Sargent's hands.
He'll certainly hope so.
But it's not straightforward.
It's not straightforward. Certainly this weekend it will do, because of the limited practice time. I have to say, though, when you make the step from Formula 2 to Formula 1, the first thing you notice is, this is a luxury. 3 hours of practice before quali. That's brilliant. I got 40 minutes before. And it's really something that you don't necessarily realise until you make that change. But they're very spoiled for time, actually, before quali on a normal weekend. And even though he would have gone to a lot of the tracks early in the season that he hasn't visited before, if you're a decent driver, you will be up to speed by the time you've done all of those laps in practice. So it's not going to hurt him, but it's not going to make the difference on its own. He will have to keep finding something himself. Now we go on board with Alex, his teammate, and looking pretty clean through turn 1. He does just get all the way over the sausage curve on the outside there, which runs sort of alongside the track rather than being with I don't know, how do you say, perpendicular to the driver as he approaches. And if you run over that, these cars do bottom out quite aggressively, and you can damage the floor. Quite crucial.
as Lance Stroll manages to avoid the sausage curb on the run down to the heavy braking zone, downhill of turn 4 into the right-hander, the gravel to your left. We've seen many a car find that gravel, get beached, get spun around. Alex Albon just a couple of years ago coming together with Lewis Hamilton when Albon was in the Red Bull, charging for a podium, maybe even a win. Helmut Marko again coming up with some rather feisty comments, saying that really dented Albon's confidence during his Red Bull stint, but certainly Albon on a mission right now in that Williams, as Stroll, another driver under pressure, but a different type of pressure when your dad owns the team, comes across the line and loses time in the last 2 sectors, but stays in 6th. The 2 Ferraris currently down in 16th and 17th. Leclerc and Sainz, they were out. They're in the pits now. They were out on the hard compounded tyre. They've done 14 and 16 laps respectively, so it seems like they're trying to work on more of their long run pace, which is something that Carlos Sainz in particular has picked up on, that they have been slightly worried about since last year. But in Montreal, despite them starting both outside the top 10, their relative pace looked fairly okay in conjunction to the Red Bull and the Mercedes and the Astons, both looking to have taken a step. So this fight behind, Andrew, I don't want to sell people false dreams, but is starting to tighten up a bit.
Well, is it, Harry? I think on the Ferrari front, you're right. They obviously, through the second half of last year, they basically dropped away from Red Bull, fundamentally as Red Bull took some weight out of their car, and it came alive for Max Verstappen. And then obviously this year they've got their development wrong, and they've found a very unstable, nervous Ferrari, and I think that's the reason why you see Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz in the wall more often than you tend to see other top drivers. They've been working on trying to improve that characteristic. They've had a new floor, new side pods a couple of races ago, and it's true that they stepped forward in Canada, but both Leclerc and Sainz have been, and Fred Vasseur, the team principal, have been very, very careful about not drawing conclusions from that, because, as they pointed out, there's very, very low degradation at Canada, and degradation is their big problem. There was literally no degradation, the teams were all saying. So, and also no fast corners. And so those are the 2 areas where the Ferrari car is weakest. So when they were being asked yesterday on the media day, you know, it's great news that you did much better in Canada, both Leclerc and Sainz were like, well, hang on, let's just validate that this weekend and see how we get on in Austria. Whereas Jack was saying tyre wear is a lot tyre degradation is a lot harder, a lot tougher, so we'll see. Vasseur feels they're on the right path, but no, I think they're only starting on the right path. The car's pretty quick in qualifying, or has been. They've had a couple of difficult races, but it's the races where they're struggling and where Aston Martin and Mercedes generally are stronger than them. And as for closing on Red Bull, well, I think, again, same argument applies. The gaps were closer in Canada, but as Alonso himself pointed out, he might have been 9 seconds behind Verstappen at the end in Canada, but it was 55 seconds behind him the race before in Spain. So he's not drawing any conclusions from that either.
Yes, we don't quite know how much Max Verstappen was pushing in Montreal. And when you don't need to, why risk it? This is the sound, once again, of the Williams of Alex Albon, who has just set the fastest overall first sector. Lost a bit of time, though, in the middle sector. He's about just under a tenth and a half down. Makes his way out through the fast 7 and right-hander of 8, which isn't really a corner in Formula 1 curves, before you then get to the double right-handers of 9 and 10. The pit lane entry between the 2. Very easy to run out wide, as we've been talking about track limits, but Albon crosses the line and loses a bit more time in that final sector. He is on that soft compound of tyre, stays 5th fastest for the time being, just over 3.5 tenths back from the fastest lap at the moment, which is a 1:06.4 from Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. So at the moment it's Mercedes, Red Bull, Aston Martin. I think if that was the top 3 come qualifying, we'd all be pretty happy and set up nicely. Speaking of that third placed Aston Martin, this is the sound of Fernando Alonso. Through the left-hander. Again, gravel to your right. This is coming into, once again, turns 7 and 8, the back half, which the second half of the track, really, as we mentioned, takes you downhill, a bit like a toboggan run that many people like to compare it to, basically a series of quick, high-speed corners, and before you know it, you're coming through that final corner, which really does drop you downhill. I don't think it quite showcases that when you're seeing it on a screen, but the undulations on this track are quite big. I mean, the elevation between the lowest and the highest is 69 meters.
I would have thought it was more than that, for having done a track run very painfully.
Front tires are not really gripping up. It's finding a lot of understeer.
Yeah, I was going to... So just understood there from GP, but I was going to say, riding on board with Fernando there, he's still pounding around on the medium tyre, is it? Yes, it is. And it looks pretty painful with the understeer there. The car's just not responding to him. They will have done a decent number of laps at this point, and at the start of the weekend when the track is green like this, green meaning it's not had the rubber go down yet, then you do tend to suffer from just the car slipping and sliding all around, and it's going to take a while for it to dial in, but time's not quite coming down yet. We're going to expect to see, I think, people coming out to do some faster runs towards the end of the session when the track is a little bit more what you would expect for quali, and bolting on those soft tyres, which only Albon's really had a proper stab at.
Yeah, and a reminder, because this is a sprint weekend, we go straight into Grand Prix qualifying later this afternoon, and it will get going from just before 4 o'clock right here online on the BBC Sport website and app. Now, traffic management is going to be massive for qualifying. Already we've had the likes of Pierre Gasly in the Alpine saying it is on the driver to make sure they are not in anybody's way, driving unnecessarily slowly. We have just witnessed a little bit of a skirmish out on track, courtesy of Gasly coming into the braking zone of 3 and finding Lance Stroll on the Aston Martin a bit lazily on the apex.
Yeah, that's poor. That's just bad awareness. He was slow down the straight, letting another car through ahead, and just mistimed it badly, didn't see or know about Gasly coming, and was right on the apex when Pierre was trying to turn in, and Pierre understandably giving some gesticulation out the cockpit, not happy with that. But this is a challenging track for that always, because it's one of the shortest laps on the calendar, as well as being one of the fastest, and that obviously means more cars per kilometre, if you like. But the other factor is that if you get out of sync with the other cars in terms of when you're pushing and when you're cooling down, the speed that you have to go at to cool the tyres down on this track is a lot slower than the relative pace of the cars going full speed, because the tyres get so hot and you have so little lap to cool them down before you start pushing on the next one, if that makes sense. So the closing speeds here in particular are always quite bad, and especially in the last sector where you're coming over crests and going downhill a lot of the time, line of sight isn't great, so it's really crucial that the drivers know what's happening.
Well, with 27 minutes and 46 seconds left of this one and only free practice 1 session, it's still Lewis Hamilton at the top from Verstappen, Alonso, Perez and Albon. The top 5, Albon on a fast-ish lap at the moment, not fast enough. We're currently witnessing Oscar Piastri in the second of the McLaren, just come across the line. I think he's on a bit of long-run pace. Of course, his car, I don't believe, has the upgrades. They're sort of Andrea Stella, the team principal, saying, as we mentioned, bringing them incrementally, rushed for introduction here in Austria, sort of 50% of what they have, and then over the next couple of races, 25% each. Here's Gasly.
Something's stuck on the left side pod. Yeah, my tear-off is stuck in the left side on the winglet.
Yeah, we can just see it, actually. It really is lodged on the winglet. It definitely looks like a bit of plastic, and it most likely is a tear-off, flapping about in the wind of Gasly's Alpine.
Going on board with Alonso now, replay going into turn 1, using all the curb on the entry to try and open it up, and a big snap. Yeah, a big snap of oversteer as he chucked the car in. It's quite a high-speed corner. It's deceiving because you think it's a 90-degree corner where you'd have to really slow the car down, but you get a lot of grip from going uphill and the car compressing into the tarmac, and it's crucial that you carry that speed onto the long straight up to turn 3. So Fernando trying to carry a lot of speed there, open up the corner as much as he could, but no grip out there yet.
Well, with 26 minutes left, Andrew, can we talk about new teams coming into Formula One potentially? Because there's been another one that's announced their bid and their intention, which is an F2 team. High-tech Grand Prix, also racing in F3 and F4, and they have formally announced that they are trying to get into Formula One in the next few years.
Yes, so there's a new team application process being undertaken by the FIA at the moment, and A number of teams have applied. Some of them have announced it, some of them haven't. The most well-known one is Andretti, who race in IndyCars and Formula E and all sorts of other places.
Andretti
Cadillac, sorry, yes.
No bias over here, of course.
Basically, they're going to badge a Renault engine if they come in, is their plan. There's another team called Pantera Team Asia. There is...
Formula Equal?
I don't know, High Tech as well. And I think, basically, if any get accepted, I think only one will get accepted, is what I'm hearing. And I think the favourite has to be Andretti, but not that it's up to the team bosses, but all the team bosses, but also Formula One themselves were pretty lukewarm about Michael Andretti coming into Formula One. There's they're worried about it, the distillation of the sport. There's a $200 million payment you have to make to compensate the other teams for lost prize money. And beginning to question whether that's enough, given that Alpine, for example, have just had a €200 million investment for 25% of their team, which values them at something like $900 million. And obviously the bigger teams like Red Bull, Mercedes and Ferrari are worth an awful lot more than that. So I think High Tech's problem is their historical connection with the Mazepin family. Not many people in Formula One believe that Mazepin, although they say publicly they have fully divested themselves from that team. Obviously, High Tech would say, yes, the Mazepins have nothing to do with it anymore. They say they've got money from Kazakhstan as opposed to Russia. But there's a scepticism within Formula One. I think it's fair to say about the veracity of that claim. And I think, obviously, with the war in Ukraine and Putin and all the rest of it, and the Mazepins being so close to Putin, no one in Formula One wants any risk of that being a situation that they get themselves embroiled in as a sport. So my interpretation is that High Tech probably don't have much of a chance of getting accepted.
Yeah, the other one I mentioned there, Formula Equal, headed up by the former BAR boss, Craig Pollock. And the idea is to make a team with a 50-50 male to female ratio of staff too, alongside the main contender, I think, Andretti Cadillac.
Yeah, he ain't getting accepted, that's for sure.
Well, those are the ones that have formally, publicly at least, announced. But well, Jack, I mean, you're a Cadillac driver these days. Can we, try and get a way back into Formula One?
A Cadillac
are you having the talks?
A throaty V8 behind me rather than anything else. Yeah. No, I think I'm quite happy sat here watching and criticising from a comfy chair. Thank you very much. No, it would be great to see a project like that get in. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to say too much because, as you say, I am a Cadillac driver. But it will be interesting to see who gets chosen, if nothing else, because I think it will be indicative of the direction that F1 and its stakeholders want to take the sport, because we have quite a variety of backgrounds and I don't want to say intentions, but ways of going about these applications. I tend to agree with Andrew that I can't see really a situation where High Tech would have the upper hand. I know them from Formula 2 and they do a fantastic job there, have won a lot of races and are undoubtedly a high-performing outfit. It's a bit of a different game getting into F1 though, and they, as much as has been said about Mazepin, it's murky waters. Can you really be sure that they've fully split ways? They were very, very close for a long time, and that's always going to be tricky for them. But no, it will be interesting. I think everybody's waiting to see the result of it. It has been delayed already a few times, the announcement, and the rumours I hear are that it will be delayed again because of this latest foray by High Tech, but we'll see.
So it's complicated because the FIA do an initial process, but then it's also up to Formula One. So it's a combined decision. Formula One has to want a new team in from a commercial perspective. They have to think that it's going to be a benefit and a boost to the sport. And what they don't want is just a situation like in 2009 when Max Mosley, the former FIA president, there was a massive amount of politicking and power play involved in this decision, but he opened the grid to 3 new teams, and all of them failed within a few years, and all of them were rubbish for the entire time they were in Formula One. Some of them weren't in it for very long at all. and they don't want that to happen again. They want, Formula One has got a lot more popularity even than it had then, and it was already a very big sport then. They don't want its image to be tarnished by someone, trundling around at the back, struggling to keep pace, just basically being a roadblock. So Andretti Cadillac, it ticks a lot of boxes. They're a very accomplished race team in a lot of categories. Cadillac is obviously part of General Motors. General Motors is one of the biggest car companies in the world. It's American. Even if they're not building their own engine yet, they're badging it Renault, as I said, but you could say the same about Alfa Romeo badging the Sauber car this year for the last few years. So, there's a lot of pluses to that Andretti project. It's well funded, I believe. They've got, they're building a new factory in the Midwest, in Indiana, I believe, to run the team out of. They've employed a guy called Nick Chester. He used to be Renault's technical director as their technical director. It's, it looks like a proper kosher project. It's hard to see any of the other ones being able to convince the FIA and Formula One that they are a stronger candidate than Andretti Cadillac is.
One of the big kickbacks, though, is from the teams. They don't want another team coming in because it's going to dilute the pot, essentially. The prize money that they get, well, they're going to have to include another team in that as well. So the price tag to get into Formula One is only going up and up. And I think that's demonstrated as well by, Andrew, you mentioned the investment coming into Alpine recently this week with the two big Hollywood A-listers, Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, the owners of Wrexham AFC, who earned promotion back to the Football League just a month or so ago, wasn't it? After 15 years. What an amazing story. But does that translate into Formula One? And it also shows the price that you have to pay to even have a small stake in a team. I think they secured Alpine 200 million euros of backing, and that was for about a 24% stake.
Yeah. I hope Ryan's got... Well, I know he's got deep pockets, but, the
Formula One, it will only get deeper.
The running joke for motorsport is something along the lines of how do you become a millionaire? Well, send a billionaire racing, and that could well be the outcome for them. But it's great to see, nonetheless. As you say, it's getting a wider appeal, and Formula One in recent years has really shot into the public view more than previously. I wouldn't say it was a niche sport before, but certainly was headed in that direction, and this is just another feather in the hat that shows, it really has made waves.
I mean, when you step back and think about it for a minute, Formula One is such a serious business. You've got Mercedes, Ferrari, Alpine, which is Renault, Aston Martin, McLaren, they're owned by the Bahraini royal family. Sauber are now Audi, even though they're not called Audi yet. Only Williams and Haas really are, but of course Red Bull, a massive soft drinks conglomerate, worth billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's only really Williams and Haas that are sort of privateer teams, if you like. It just goes.
Haas use a lot of Ferrari bits.
Haas basically buy their car from Ferrari pretty much, although they have to design their own aerodynamic parts. But just goes to show how high the level is, and what would be the challenge, the bar that any new team would have to meet. It's incredibly difficult, and I think within Formula One there's the sense that even people like Michael Andretti probably don't understand just how hard it is to be competitive in Formula One. Whether that's fair, a remark to make about Michael Andretti is a different question. I can see Jack shaking his head a little bit.
I'm not shaking, tilting inquisitively. Yeah.
I mean, and I'm sure Michael Andretti would be offended by any suggestion that was the case. But nevertheless, that is a feeling within Formula One among the sort of senior people.
It's always been a slight cultural division, I think, hasn't it, in Formula One, that the view of the Europeans versus the Americans, and that's massively simplifying it, and it's not as deep a division as it used to be, but I think there's definitely still traces of that. The view of the established European manufacturers and teams being that, F1 is a step above anything that happens in America. Again, it's very debatable whether that's true or not, but it's F1 as a sport is certainly the most advanced and most difficult one to break into. It takes a lot of commitment, both financially and through time, talent, etc., etc. So, and Andretti have not done it before. So it's a fair question to ask, but who knows what the answer is in this day and age. You know, Andretti have had huge success, not just in America, but in international series as well. So they're not strangers to European racing, that's for sure. But yeah, F1 can be its own ball game.
It's the American market, though, for Formula One. It's just becoming more and more appealing. Obviously, Andretti, a huge American name, but the investment going into Alpine, heavily American, Alpine saying it's not just about the F1 team, it's about their road cars. They basically want to try and crack America with their Alpine road cars too, and become more of a name, because you know Renault. Do you know Alpine as a road car? Really, probably not.
Well, I went to the Alpine factory on Monday. I was one of only 4 Formula 1 journalists who was invited to see a massive investor day where this was all announced, and Laurent Rossi, the CEO, did a very long talk about their future plans, and it was quite impressive to see how much the brand has grown just in the 2 years that they've been in Formula 1. The value of it has gone up enormously, the sales have gone up enormously, and they've got big plans for a number of new road car models. As they're basically, Luca De Meo, the boss of Renault, is basically establishing Alpine as sort of Renault's sports brand, basically. And I drove one of the A110 sports cars around the roads around Enston, Jack. I don't know whether you...
Teeth shaken out?
It was quite...
Not a reference to the car, I'm quick to say. Well, a reference to the roads.
Well, the car was quite stiffly suspended as well, and the roads were. I did notice even more stiffly suspended than my M Sport BMW after. So,
oh dear.
But it was quite eye-opening in terms of how the full extent of their plans. And yes, America was key to it, and that's just a reflection of how much Formula One has grown in America now, how much of an impact it's making over there, and what Alpine think that they can then use that to build, a major road car brand within the Renault empire.
Well, certainly, always lots to think about in the world of Formula One. Here's what's been going on track in the last few moments while we've been talking. Hamilton is still fast. He's in the pits, as is Verstappen. They're 1 and 2. Alonso just about to cross the line. He is still out there on the medium compound of tyre. He's third in front of Perez. Albon in the top 5. Piastri, Stroll, Tsunoda, Ocon, Bottas, the top 10. Norris, Gasly, Zhou, Magnussen, De Vries, the top 15. Russell, Leclerc, Sainz, Sargent, and Nico Hülkenberg down in 20th and last, with Haas installing a special sensor on their cars in this practice session to understand why they struggle so much with race pace compared to their qualifying, with Nico Hülkenberg having a stellar qualifying last time out. A penalty, though, see him dropping down the grid to I think he ended up starting in 5th spot for the Canadian Grand Prix, but then plummeted like a stone in the race. Both Haas cars falling to the back of the pack, so they're trying to get a grip on why their qualifying pace is so much better than their race pace. Talk of the 2 Alpines, they both come across the line in tandem. Gasly in front of Ocon.
Andrew, a question for you. Maybe you didn't notice, and then I'd say next time you go to Enstone or the Alpine factory, did you notice any of the exit signs?
I didn't know.
Are they still Benetton coloured?
Shall I tell you why I didn't notice the exit signs? Because they made me park on a farm.
They didn't give you VIP parking?
Around the back of the factory. I had to turn around at the entrance and go back down the road and turn into a farm.
No, I mean the fire exit signs in the building.
I didn't notice that. No, are they still Benetton, are they?
Next time you go, just have a look, because
it's not the first time I've been, but
well, it's not something that you'd normally notice. And I'm sorry to divert chat again from the track action, but frankly there is no action at this point. So next time you go, have a look, because the story goes when Fabio was in his reign and Benetton opened up that factory, he got special permission from the Safety Standards Association, or whichever organisation it is, to be the only building in the UK to not have their fire exit signs in either luminous red, yellow or green, which are the standard colours you have to choose from. Instead, they had Benetton coloured fire exit signs. I thought it was brilliant. So they're still that way now because they haven't been replaced in all these years.
I'm a bit gutted that I didn't talk to you before I went rather than after.
That's real bubble hat trivia for you. So yeah, fun fact. If you ever have the pleasure of having a tour around Enstone, just have a look for me. I haven't been in a while, so maybe they've changed them.
And make sure you tweet Jack that as well. Constantly, always, what colour. Take a picture of it too. see how it stands. Stroll's just got up to second on the soft set of tyres in the Aston Martin, so it's now Hamilton and Stroll the top two. And there were a few hairy moments a short while ago for Ocon and Leclerc, just really fighting their cars respectively around this track. Sargent is out there as well, but it really is a little bit dry out there in terms of running right now, with 10 minutes and 42 seconds remaining. And Sargent, though, finding a little bit of time. Hashtag BBC F1, Andrew Priestley has said, is there going to be a lot of tyre saving going on in practice one with a jam-packed weekend of qualifying, sprint race, and the race sessions still to come? Now, of course, there's been a slight change in terms of the tyre rules for the sprint shootout. Originally, back in Baku, the rule was they had to use new mediums for SQ1 and SQ2, and then a new soft for SQ3, which, of course, if you'd used all those up in qualifying, this Grand Prix qualifying, then, you know, there was talk of, well, we can go out on an intermediate and see if that does anything. That has now been changed to avoid any of that kind of silly running. So the drivers can now use any set of soft tyre in SQ3. So that means people can still gamble and use all the softs they want before sprint qualifying, knowing that they can still run at least in the sprint shootout. So in terms of actual tyre saving, that actually, I think, relieves them a bit, no?
Definitely, yeah. I think they're not going to be as concerned. Combine that with the fact that most teams, if not all, they will have done their first performance run on a tyre, most of them hards and mediums except for Williams, and then they will have taken those tyres on a long run to evaluate them for the race. So they actually haven't used that many sets of tyres. A lot of them are now sticking on a set of soft to do their one quali performance run, and we're seeing the first sectors and quick times trickling in for those runs now.
Yeah, George Russell's just done a lap which obviously didn't go very well. He's only gone up to fifth on that soft tyre run, and we just seen Lewis Hamilton go wide. Is that turn 3, the one at the top of the hill?
Yep. And Valtteri Bottas finding the gravel and the grass and getting all out of sorts, coming through the exit of turn 4 in his Alfa Romeo. A little bit of debris on track as well, a bit of carbon fibre perhaps that's flown off the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll. But I think with 8.5 or just over that minutes left to go of this session, we are starting to get the fast lap time set. Everyone starting to come out on the soft compounder tyre. But before we get fully stuck into that, Amit, who is a quality assurance engineer at Alpine, has got in touch on the hashtag BBC F1. I'm looking at a fire exit sign now, Jack, and it's green.
But what shade of green?
What shade of green?
What shade of green?
Come on.
Benetton green obviously was a very specific and probably.
It's because most of our signs are green.
Yeah, well, but the point is that fire exit signs, I think there was a few different options, but they had to be very luminous for obvious reasons, for safety. And these are a very nice sort of teal green, if you look carefully.
Okay, we'll come back to our Amit. Is it teal or is it a different type of green? Jack needs to know.
Charles Leclerc's just gone fastest, Harry. Amit contacted me on Monday as well, actually, when he heard me ask a question.
Parking in the farm.
Yeah, he heard me ask a question in the press conference to Rossi, and he realised that I was at the factory, and he's a regular listener. So he said he was sorry that he had missed me, but I must have walked past him anyway.
Brilliant. I'm just watching. Sorry, Andrew. I'm watching the last few corners on board with Verstappen, and it's something that's not come up at all this session on the stewards' messaging board. Is track limits, and there've definitely been a few laps set going all 4 wheels over, which is very easy to do, in particular at the last corner, which is unusual. Usually the stewards like to give the teams a taste of what's to come and set the stall out early, rather than surprise them in qualifying, and the drivers could be in for a nasty shock if they're not behaving themselves. Yeah.
So a bit of time context. Leclerc went quickest on his soft tyre run, and then depressingly for Ferrari, Max Verstappen went out on the medium tyre and went quicker than him by 0.125 seconds. And we've got Carlos Sainz about halfway around his lap, Jack, at the moment.
Sainz finding time, being down in the bottom half of the running order for most of this session, focusing on long run pace, but now out there on the soft tyres, running a little bit wide, coming through turn 9, and almost look like 4 wheels off the track, but it's purple for Carlos Sainz. It's not, it's purple green, apologies, but he does still go fastest, a 1:05.9, a 10th in front of Verstappen, but he is on that medium tyre. Leclerc third, Hamilton fourth, Perez fifth, Stroll just coming across the line now, and he got up to 6th place. Alonso is still out on track, but he is on that medium compounder tyre. And Andrew mentioned George Russell's poor lap on the soft, and he's come straight back into the pits again. He's 8th in front of Magnussen and Albon, the top 10. This is the sound of Max Verstappen coming through the final corner and right onto the curb. And did he put all 4 wheels on the wrong side of the line? I think he did, coming through that final corner, because he got a little bit of a kick from the rear.
That would have been a disqualified lap had it been in qualifying. Here's Tsunoda.
You go.
What do you think?
Go. You push.
It's too late, man.
It's okay. So we do the next one.
Well, that was Yuki Tsunoda's team radio. Just a little bit of confusion there of what he was getting set up to do. It looked like he was coming back into the pits, actually, but then it was too late for him coming through the final corner to set a fast lap time, or to start a push lap even. So around he goes for another one. Tsunoda down in 15th at the moment, but he's out there on the soft, so we'll wait to see what that AlphaTauri can do. Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas is coming towards the end of his lap. He is stone cold last right now, but he's now on the softs. So across the line, DRS, the rear wing flap is open, and he gets up 1 spot into 19th. That puts Norris down into 20th, but we haven't seen what the McLaren has got just yet. The other McLaren in Piastri's hands, up in 11th right now, with less than 5 minutes to go of this one and only practice session. I like having only one practice session. I think it provides a bit more jeopardy. I think it puts the drivers and the teams under pressure. There's more unknowns.
Definitely. I mean, even with a session like this, which has probably gone as smoothly as it could have done for most of the teams out there, and in good conditions, you're still going to be short on laps and data going into the qualifyings and the race. So it's a little bit into the unknown. You know, there's always the potential for mistakes to be punished a lot more harshly. So yeah, it's nice.
Anybody else on a quick lap at the moment? Not really. They're all either coming into the pits or on push laps or slow laps. This is the sound of Max Verstappen, who is trawling along very slowly indeed towards the downhill braking zone of turn 4. And it's just come from turn 3, the highest part of the circuit, and then you start to head downhill. Leclerc, though, is out there, and well, if he is pushing, he's not finding any time. No, he's not pushing. Certainly like he was picking up a bit of speed there coming into turn 3, but not finding a push lap on this occasion. And Leclerc and Sainz then, much better than their earlier pace was suggesting, but of course they were going on the long run pace. But Ferrari will be hoping they will find a bit of improved performance, and certainly in qualifying at least, crucial for them, because if they, in Montreal, if they weren't starting outside the top 10 with work to do and carve through the field, they could well have been in that fight for the final podium spots.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, although this track is one that you may feel would be an easy place to overtake at, given you have long straights, a lot of DRS, and quite deep braking zones. Here's Verstappen on the radio.
I'm happy to go for a 3rd slow lap, Max. We've got the time. Let's go for a 3rd slow lap.
So that's something else. I'll come back to the Ferrari boys in a second, but we've seen Verstappen absolutely crawling around this track. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous when you see an F1 car going that slowly. But it's going back to the fact that this place cooks the tyres pretty quickly, especially in a qualifying run. And he's now done not 1, not 2, but he's going for 3 laps of cool down, which is very unusual, but it's because the track is so short and the track temps do get quite high here. So that's all in an effort to get those tyres back into their window and really performing well. But going back to the Ferrari guys, they will definitely want to be starting a bit higher up here, because one of the risks here is that you get stuck in the DRS train, which is one of the worst circuits for it, because although you have a lot of DRS, the high-speed nature of the back end of the circuit makes it very difficult to follow going into those overtaking opportunities, and you can quite quickly get into a situation where everything on the car is overheating, brakes, tyres, engine, and you're kind of powerless to move forward.
Well, right now, Sainz is sitting pretty at the top. Pierre Gasly in the Alpine is right down in 18th, but he's just done jaunt through the pit lane and stopped in his box, laying a bit of rubber down and back out of the pit exit. Pit loss time is just over 20 seconds here in Austria, so bear that in mind when it comes to the race and strategy. Tsunoda finally able to get back onto his proper push lap and his personal best so far in Sector 1, as we wait and see what he's like in Sector 2. Comes through the timing beam. Still a personal best, but still quite a way down, over 7/10 down on Sainz.
So the listener was asking about tyre saving. Are we going to see a lot of that? Well, I think that's what we're seeing right now. Verstappen and Alonso, for example, neither of them have run the soft tyre at all. And neither has Perez, actually. So it looks to me like they're saving some softs for qualifying over the weekend.
Tsunoda comes across the line and is 13th fastest, about a second off the pace at the moment. And Hulkenberg and Haas just getting up into 12th. This is the sound of the other AlphaTauri of Nick de Vries, who we've spoken a lot about. This is Team Radio.
I don't understand why Magnussen just got upset with me. I went out of the way.
So we're riding on board with the AlphaTauri driver, and that was is coming into the uphill of turn 4. So it's coming out of turn 3, the right-hander, and was it turn 1 he was coming out of?
I think it was turn 1.
Yes, it was turn 1. And then Kevin Magnussen in the Haas suddenly appears to driver's left and really squeezes him up towards the grass and the edge of the track, almost contact.
Yeah, showing his displeasure as only an angry driver knows how. We're getting a few laps coming through now. Magnussen does eventually get a lap down after that tangle with de Vries.
Really used that anger and got up to 7th.
Not a bad lap at all. We're now on board with Leclerc, who's looking pretty good. He's got 2 green sectors, no purple, but as he comes up to the line, it puts him P2, just behind his teammate, less than 300ths of a second. Verstappen has gone purple in Sector 2 and Sector 3. He goes fastest.
Well, where else do you go fastest other than the Red Bull Ring for the Red Bull driver?
It's a conspiracy. They shortened the track for him.
It's already the shortest track on the calendar, yet they'll just do the 6 turns and make it through. It's a 105.7 for Max Verstappen on that medium compound of tyre as well, which everybody is going to look at and grimace, I think, because Sainz, Leclerc, Hamilton all behind on the soft compound of tyre. Perez, though, Jack, 5th, half a second off of Verstappen, also on the medium.
Yeah, that's a big gap. I mean, this is a track known for having tight qualifyings because of, again, we'll refer to it being a short track. But half a second, that's nearly a 10th per reasonable corner out there. I know we have 10 on the map, but yeah, there's 5 or 6 that are really crucial here, and it's a big gap.
Well, that is the checkered flag then, and pretty much everybody has crossed the line as we get a yellow flag followed by a virtual safety car. I think they're just testing the systems here because the nature of the pit lane is you can't do a practice start at the end of it because it feeds out after turn 1. You do turn 1 basically in the pits. So drivers lining up onto the grid then. So this is how the only practice session has ended before we go into Grand Prix qualifying later on this afternoon here in Spielberg. It's Max Verstappen fastest, a 105.7, Sainz, Leclerc the top 3, then it's Hamilton, Perez the top 5, Stroll, Magnussen, Alonso, Russell and Zhou Guanyu in the Alfa Romeo rounds out the top 10, Albon, Piastri, Hulkenberg, Bottas and Tsunoda the top 15, De Vries, Sargent, Ocon, Gasly and Lando Norris 20th and last at the end of this 1-hour practice session. And now it starts to heat up seriously. We will get into qualifying, which gets going a little later on at 3:55 in the UK, and you can listen to that on the BBC Sport website and on the app. Thank you to Andrew Benson, to Jack Aitken, and we will be here for Grand Prix qualifying. Do join us then. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.